Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive with us.
It's great to be back.
Today we're diving deep into A Course in Miracles, specifically Lesson 68.
Love holds no grievances.
Love holds no grievances. It's a really interesting one, and I'm really curious to unpack this one with you.
Yeah, this is a really deep one.
So how do we apply this to our lives? I'm always looking for the practical takeaways.
For sure, for sure. Well, to really get the most out of Lesson 68, I think it helps to remember what we learned in the last lesson, 67.
Okay, yeah. So what was the key message of Lesson 67 again?
It was all about remembering who we really are.
At our core,
At our core, yeah.
we are love.
We are love, but so often we forget that, right? We get caught up in all this ego stuff, that part of us that's all about fear and separation.
Right, the ego self.
Yeah, exactly. And when we're operating from that ego self, it's easy to get hurt. And when we get hurt, what do?
We hold on to grievances.
We hold on to grievances. Bingo.
Right, yeah, and that's where Lesson 68 comes in.
So
It takes that idea a step further and shows us how holding on to those grievances actually blocks us from experiencing that love that we talked about. That's our true nature.
right. So it's like we're putting up walls.
It's like we're building walls around our hearts, yeah.
Yeah. I love that analogy. And the lesson even uses the analogy of a dam. Like imagine a river, a beautiful flowing river of love, and then we come along with our grievances and we build this big dam blocking the flow.
Wow. And speaking of the lesson itself, there's one quote that really stood out to me. The main teaching of Lesson 68 is that love does not hold grievances.
So simple, but so powerful, right?
Yes. I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. Love and grievances just don't go together.
It's like oil and water. They just don't mix.
And, another thing that really resonated with me from the material was this idea that holding on to a grievance is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick.
Oh, I've heard that one before, and it's so true.
It's self-inflicted suffering.
Yeah, and the lesson even says it straight out. Holding on to them perpetuates suffering.
It's us who end up carrying all that weight, that anger, bitterness, resentment.
And it's not just emotional, It can manifest physically, too. Think about when you replay a hurtful event in your mind, how your body tenses up, All those grievances, they create chronic stress.
Right, so we've established that holding on to grievances is bad news for us.
It's not doing us any favors, that's for sure.
But how do we actually let them go? It's one thing to say, okay, I need to let go of this grievance, but it's another thing entirely to actually do it.
You're telling me it's tough.
Yeah.
Especially when those grievances are really deep-rooted.
Right.
But, that's where A Course in Miracles really shines. It gives us practical tools and techniques to guide us through that process.
That's what I was hoping we could delve into a little bit today.
For sure.
I'm eager to learn some strategies for actually releasing those grievances and experiencing more of that inherent love we talked about.
Great. And the lesson really emphasizes this idea that grievances, they don't just come out of nowhere.
They have a root.
They come from a deeper sense of fear and separation.
It's that ego self again, right?
Yeah.
Creating that illusion of separateness.
Exactly. That illusion that we are separate from others, separate from the world.
And when we feel separate,
Then we feel threatened.
we're more likely to perceive threats.
Exactly. Even when there's no real threat. Someone might say something and boom, we've got a grievance brewing, but it's because we're interpreting their words through that lens of fear and separation.
So our ego's like on high alert, constantly scanning for any potential attack.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
So one of the most powerful ways to start releasing grievances is to shift our perspective from fear to love.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do we actually do that?
Well, the lesson suggests that instead of focusing on how someone wronged us, we try to see their actions through a lens of compassion.
So trying to understand where they're coming from.
Yes. Recognizing their humanity, understanding that they're on their own journey, just like we are. It doesn't mean condoning their actions, but it's about choosing a different emotional response.
It's about meeting them with understanding.
It's about choosing love. Remember, true love is unconditional. It's free from judgment. It's about extending forgiveness, not just to others, but also to ourselves.
Forgiving ourselves, that's so important.
You can be so hard on ourselves.
Yes. It's easy to get stuck in that blame game and forget that holding on to anger and resentment is only hurting us.
It's like we're keeping that wound open instead of letting it heal.
And what I find really interesting is that the lesson suggests that simply by understanding the true nature of love,
that it's unconditional.
that it's all-encompassing,
We can start to see things differently.
it's a complete shift in perception.
It is, and it takes practice.
Yeah.
It's not like we can just flip a switch.
Right.
Our egos are quite attached to those grievances.
Yeah, they love those grievances.
They do, but the more we practice choosing love over fear, the easier it becomes.
It's like we're rewiring our brains for compassion instead of reactivity.
Exactly. And A Course in Miracles even offers some practical exercises to help us with this rewiring process. Want to explore one together?
Yes, I'd love to. Let's
Great. There's one called the grievance release.
Grievance release. Okay.
It's a powerful way to actually identify those grievances we're holding on to, reflect on them, and then consciously choose to release them.
Okay, walk me through it.
All right. First things first, you got to find a quiet space where you can reflect without distractions.
Got it.
Then grab a pen and paper, old school style, or open up a notes app on your phone,
Yeah.
whatever works for you. The key is to have a way to actually externalize those thoughts.
So we can see them in front of us.
Exactly. Now take a deep breath and really allow yourself to tune into your inner landscape.
Okay.
What grievances are you holding on to? Big or small? Recent or from way back when? Write them all down.
Don't hold back.
No holding back. Let it all out. Any resentment, anger, injustice, anything that's weighing on your heart, write it down.
That's where the real work begins,
Yeah.
right? Actually facing those uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah. It takes courage.
But it can also be so liberating.
So true. And remember, the goal here isn't to judge ourselves or wallow in those negative feelings.
Right.
We're just acknowledging them and then consciously choosing to release them.
Okay, so let's say I've got my list of grievances all written out, staring back at me.
Okay.
What's the next step?
Now comes the powerful part. For each grievance, take a moment to really reflect on how it makes you feel.
Sit with it.
Sit with those emotions, observe them without judgment, and then ask yourself, what would it feel like to let this go?
Wow, that's a powerful question.
It is, right?
It's like we're opening a door to freedom.
Exactly. Because it's about recognizing that we have a choice.
Right.
We can choose to stay trapped in that cycle of resentment, or we can choose to break free.
And to help us break free, what does the lesson suggest we do?
It suggests replacing each grievance with a loving thought or affirmation.
Okay, so for example, if someone cut me off in traffic and I'm fuming, I'm ranting and raving about how reckless they are, instead of replaying that scene and getting more and more angry,
Right.
I could try replacing that anger with a thought like, maybe they're rushing to the hospital.
Like maybe they're having a really bad day.
I wish them safety and peace.
Yes. That changes the whole energy, doesn't it?
Yeah,
By consciously choosing a more compassionate perspective,
right.
we break the grip of the grievance and allow love to flow back in.
I love that. And it's not just about those big dramatic events.
Right.
This applies to those everyday annoyances too, right?
Totally.
Like your partner forgets to take out the trash again.
Again!
Or your coworker keeps interrupting you during meetings.
It's so easy to let those little things build up
It is.
and create resentment.
And then we start keeping score.
Exactly.
And that just makes things worse.
It does. But what if, instead of getting annoyed, we tried to see those situations through the lens of Lesson 68?
Right.
So instead of thinking, they did it again, they clearly don't respect me, we could try.
Thinking maybe they're just stressed and overwhelmed.
Maybe they have a different communication style than me.
I can choose to address this calmly and with understanding.
It's about choosing a loving response,
Yeah.
even when we don't feel like it.
Even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard, because our egos, they love to hold on to those little grievances.
They do. It's like their favorite thing.
Those little nuggets of resentment.
But the more we practice choosing love over fear, even in those tiny, seemingly insignificant moments.
The more we transform our whole outlook on life.
So we're not just letting go of those specific grievances, we're actually changing our default mode of reacting to the world.
You got it. It's like we're rewiring our brains for
Yeah.
compassion and understanding. And as we do that, we experience a deeper sense of peace, connection, and well-being in every area of our lives.
I'm starting to get it.
It's powerful stuff.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling a shift in my perspective just by talking about this.
That's the power of these teachings.
Yeah.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race.
It's not a sprint. It's a marathon.
Exactly. Be patient with yourself and celebrate every step you take towards releasing grievances and choosing love.
Okay, I want to go back to that grievance release exercise for a moment.
Okay.
We talked about identifying the grievances, reflecting on how they make us feel,
Right.
but what comes after that?
Right. So after you've sat with those emotions and really asked yourself, what would it feel like to let this go? The next step is to replace each grievance with a loving thought or affirmation.
Okay.
Remember that example with the reckless driver?
Yeah. Instead of fuming about their driving, we could imagine They're rushing to the hospital
Or dealing with an emergency.
and offer them a silent wish for safety and peace.
Exactly. It's about consciously choosing a more compassionate perspective.
We're essentially rewiring those thought patterns.
Yes. Replacing those negative reactive thoughts with more positive and loving ones.
It's like we're installing new software.
I love that analogy. It's about consciously choosing a different way of thinking, a different way of responding.
Okay, so we've identified the grievances, reflected on them, and replaced them with loving thoughts. What's the final step in this grievance release process?
This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, good.
The lesson suggests that we physically release those grievances.
Physically release them. What does that mean? Do we shout them into the void?
Yeah.
Or write them on a piece of paper and burn it?
You can get creative with it,
Okay.
but the source material specifically recommends destroying the paper,
Okay.
which can be incredibly cathartic.
So rip it up, burn it safely, or just toss it in the recycling bin.
Whatever feels right to you. The act of physically letting go of those written words can be a really powerful symbolic gesture.
I can see that. Like a visual representation of letting go.
Exactly. It reinforces our intention to release those grievances and move forward.
And even if we don't feel an immediate shift, just by doing that, we're planting those seeds of love and forgiveness.
Exactly. Just like a seed needs time to germinate and grow.
It's like we're tending to our inner garden, removing those weeds of resentment to make space for the flowers of compassion to bloom.
I love that. And as we cultivate that inner garden, we naturally radiate more love and compassion into the world around us.
It's like a ripple effect of healing.
We heal ourselves, and then we contribute to the healing of others.
This is so powerful. And what I love about A Course in Miracles is that it provides these practical tools and techniques that we can actually use.
To create change.
Yeah, to create real and lasting change in our lives.
It's not just about lofty spiritual concepts.
Yeah.
It's about actually embodying those principles in our daily lives.
Okay, one more question about this grievance release exercise. What if some of those grievances are really deep-seated? Like, what if they stem from childhood trauma or a long history of hurt and resentment?
That's a really great question. And it's important to acknowledge that some grievances can be a lot harder to release than others.
Right.
You know, if you're dealing with deep-seated trauma or a long history of pain,
Yeah.
working with a therapist or counselor can be incredibly beneficial.
So we're not expected to just magically let go of everything overnight.
No, healing takes time.
Yeah.
And it's okay to seek support along the way.
I appreciate you acknowledging that
Okay?
because it can feel really overwhelming
Of course.
to think about tackling those really big issues on our own.
Absolutely. Be gentle with yourself. Recognize that healing takes time. And even if we can't completely release those deep-seated grievances right away, just becoming aware of them
Yeah.
and choosing to approach them with compassion
Right.
is a huge step in the right direction.
It's like shining a light on those dark corners.
Yes.
Starting to dismantle those walls of resentment.
And as we do that, we create space for healing, for forgiveness, and ultimately for love to flow in.
This has been so insightful.
It's been a pleasure.
I feel so much more empowered to approach those challenging emotions with more compassion and understanding.
That's wonderful to hear. It's been a joy exploring these concepts with you. And you know, what I find so fascinating is that the Course in Miracles emphasizes that forgiveness isn't just a one-time event.
It's not like we check it off our list.
It's an ongoing practice. It's
Yeah.
about cultivating a mindset of forgiveness.
Right. A willingness to see ourselves and others through a lens of love and compassion, even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard,
It's like we're building a muscle for forgiveness.
you got it. And the more we use it,
The stronger it
the
gets.
stronger it gets. Exactly. And as we strengthen that muscle, we experience such a profound shift in our relationships, our outlook on life, our overall sense of peace and well-being.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. I feel like I'm walking away with so many new tools and perspectives for navigating those bumps in the road of life.
That's great to hear.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
It's been my pleasure.
I know our listeners are going to get so much out of this.
I hope so. You know, it's amazing how just shifting our perspective like that can create such a ripple effect.
It really is.
You know, we release a grievance and suddenly we're more at ease in our interactions, more understanding of others, and just generally lighter.
Yeah, it's like we're decluttering our emotional baggage,
Yeah.
making space for something new to emerge.
I love that analogy. And as we continue exploring this idea of releasing grievances, there's another point from the source material that I think is particularly important to highlight.
Well, all ears. What is it?
The lesson really emphasizes that true forgiveness
Yeah.
isn't just about letting go of anger towards others.
Okay.
It also involves forgiving ourselves.
That's a good point. We can be our own worst critics, can't we?
Yeah.
Always replaying past mistakes, beating ourselves up for perceived shortcomings.
Absolutely. It's like we're holding on to grievances against ourselves.
Yeah, it's like we're carrying around this inner critic that's constantly pointing out our flaws and reminding us of all the ways we've messed up.
And that self-directed negativity can be so damaging.
It really can be.
Yeah.
So how do we apply the principles of Lesson 68 to those self-directed grievances? Is the process the same?
The principles are absolutely the same.
Okay.
It's all about recognizing those negative thoughts, challenging them with compassion, and choosing to replace them with loving affirmations.
Okay, so instead of saying, I'm so stupid for making that mistake,
Yeah, which we've all done.
which I'm definitely guilty of.
We could try saying something like, I'm learning and growing from this experience.
Okay.
I'm worthy of love and forgiveness even when I make mistakes.
That's a game changer. It's like we're shifting from that self-critical inner voice to a more nurturing and supportive one.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can have such a profound impact on our self-esteem and our overall well-being.
Absolutely. And this is reminding me of something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that holding on to those grievances, even the ones that we directed ourselves, really perpetuate suffering.
Yes, that's a key message from the source material.
Yeah, it really highlights that self-inflicted nature of so much of our suffering.
Like we're choosing to stay stuck in a cycle of pain
Right.
when we have the power to break free.
Yeah, and that power lies in choosing love over fear.
Exactly.
Forgiveness,
Yes.
both of ourselves and others, is a powerful act of self-love.
It's a reminder that forgiveness isn't about condoning someone else's actions.
Right.
It's about liberating ourselves from the burden of resentment.
Beautifully said. It's like we're extending a hand of understanding and compassion,
Yes.
both to ourselves and to the person we're trying to forgive.
And that act of extending compassion can be incredibly liberating. It frees us from the prison of our own pain and allows us to move forward with more peace and grace.
This has been such a thought-provoking discussion. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of the wisdom contained in Lesson 68.
There's always more to uncover with A Course in Miracles. Every time you revisit these lessons, you're bound to find new layers of meaning and insight.
Okay, before we move on, I want to circle back to that grievance release exercise we were discussing.
Okay.
We covered those first few steps where we identify the grievances and reflect on how they make us feel,
Right.
but what comes after that?
Right. So once you've sat with those emotions and asked yourself, what would it feel like to let this go? The next step is to replace each grievance with a loving thought or affirmation. Remember that example with the reckless driver?
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of fuming about their driving,
Mm-hmm.
we imagine they might be rushing to the hospital or dealing with some kind of emergency,
Right.
and we offer them a silent wish for safety and peace.
Exactly. It's about consciously choosing a more compassionate perspective.
So we're essentially rewiring those thought patterns, replacing the negative, reactive thoughts with more positive and loving ones.
That's a great way to put it. And the lesson emphasizes that this takes practice. Our minds are so used to defaulting to those old patterns of resentment and judgment.
It's like we've been running the same program for so long,
Yeah.
and now we're trying to install new software.
I love that analogy. It's about consciously choosing a different way of thinking and responding.
Okay, so we've identified the grievances, reflected on them, and replaced them with loving thoughts. What's the final step in this grievance release process?
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The lesson suggests that we physically release those grievances.
Physically release them. What does that mean? Like, do we shout them into the void or write them on a piece of paper and burn it?
You can get creative with it. The source material specifically recommends destroying the paper,
Okay.
which can be incredibly cathartic.
So we could rip it up, burn it safely, or just toss it in the recycling bin.
Exactly. The act of physically letting go of those written words can be a powerful symbolic gesture.
Okay.
It reinforces our intention to release those grievances and move forward.
I can see how that would be a really powerful visual representation of letting go.
It is. And even if you don't feel an immediate shift,
Yeah.
trust that the seeds of love and forgiveness have been planted.
Okay.
Just like a seed needs time to germinate and grow, so too does forgiveness.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. It's like we're tending to our inner garden, removing the weeds of resentment to make space for the flowers of compassion to bloom.
I love that imagery. And as we cultivate this inner garden, we naturally radiate more love and compassion into the world around us.
It's like a ripple effect of healing. We heal ourselves, and then we contribute to the healing of others.
Absolutely. It's incredibly powerful. And the beauty of A Course in Miracles is that it provides us with these practical tools and techniques that we can use to create real and lasting change in our lives.
This lesson has really highlighted that for me. It's not just about lofty spiritual concepts.
Right.
It's about making those concrete shifts in how we think, feel, and interact with the world.
It's about embodying those spiritual principles in our daily lives.
Okay, I have one more question about this grievance release exercise.
Okay.
What if some of those grievances are really deep-seated,
Mm-hmm.
like stemming from childhood trauma or a long history of hurt and resentment?
That's a great question. And it's important to acknowledge that some grievances can be much more challenging to release than others.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with deep-seated trauma or a long history of pain, working with a therapist or counselor can be incredibly beneficial.
So we're not expected to just magically let go of everything overnight.
No, not at all. Healing is a process.
Right.
And it's okay to seek support and guidance along the way.
I appreciate you acknowledging that because it can feel overwhelming
Of course.
to think about tackling those really deep-seated issues on our own.
Absolutely. Be gentle with yourself. Recognize that healing takes time. And even if we can't completely release those deep-seated grievances right away,
Right.
simply becoming aware of them and choosing to approach them with compassion is a huge step in the right direction.
It's like we're shining a light on those dark corners,
Yes.
starting to dismantle those walls of resentment that have been built up over time.
And as we do that, we create space for healing, forgiveness, and ultimately love to flow in.
This has been such an insightful discussion.
It's been a pleasure.
I'm already feeling more empowered to approach those challenging emotions with more compassion and understanding.
It's been a joy sharing this deep dive with you.
As we've been talking about forgiveness and releasing these grievances, it's really striking me that this lesson has implications far beyond just our personal lives.
Yeah, I think you're right. It makes you think about how these principles could apply on a much larger scale.
Exactly. So if holding on to these grievances creates suffering on an individual level, just imagine the suffering we experience when we hold on to grievances as a society, as nations, as a global community.
Wow, that's a really powerful thought. Think about all those historical conflicts, the political divides, the social injustices that we see happening all over the world.
It's like we're all caught up in this web of resentment, passing those wounds down from generation to generation.
And A Course in Miracles reminds us that we can't have true peace without forgiveness.
Right.
We can't create a more just and loving world if we're still clinging to all that anger and resentment from the past.
Yeah, it's like a call to action to start embodying these principles of forgiveness, not just in our personal lives, but also in our communities and in the world at large.
It's a call to recognize our shared humanity,
Yeah.
to see past those labels and divisions that separate us,
Right.
to choose love over fear even when we're faced with huge challenges.
I mean, that's a tall order, but I truly believe it's possible.
Me too.
We can start by transforming our own hearts and minds. Those ripples of change can spread outwards and create a more peaceful and compassionate world.
Absolutely. It starts with each of us choosing to let go of those grievances, those stories we keep telling ourselves about who's right and who's wrong, who deserves what.
It's about remembering that we are all connected
We're all part of this big, beautiful tapestry of life.
and that we all ultimately want the same things: peace, love, and happiness.
And that's the beauty of A Course in Miracles, It offers us a path, a way of looking at the world and ourselves that leads to that experience of peace, love, and happiness.
Well, this has been such an incredible deep dive into Lesson 68. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about the teachings, but also about how to apply them to make real changes in my life and the world around me.
It's been a joy exploring all of this with you. And just remember, the journey of forgiveness and releasing these grievances, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
Be patient with yourself, celebrate every step you take towards choosing love, and just trust that the universe will support you along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. I know our listeners are really going to appreciate this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
And for all of you listening out there, we encourage you to really think about the messages of Lesson 68. What's one small grievance that you can practice releasing today? Notice how it feels to choose love over fear, even in just a small way. Remember, every act of forgiveness is a step towards healing and wholeness for yourself and for the world.
Thank you for joining us.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into A Course in Miracles. Until then, may you be filled with peace, love, and the courage to forgive.